Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this SWIC Week 2 session with a focus on gas operators working to net zero. My name is Ollie Lancaster, Chief Executive Officer at the Institution of Gas Engineers and Managers, or IGEM, as you may know us. Please can I ask you to turn off your microphones and to make sure your cameras are off as well. Mute your microphones and cameras off, please. And do feel free to tweet throughout the session using the hashtag SWICweek and post your updates to your connections on LinkedIn. Martin Garrett, Project Director at Costain, is on the call and will be gathering questions from the chat for us to put to the panel at the end of all of the presentations. Just to be aware, there you are. Hi, Martin. Just to be aware, this virtual conference is being recorded and will be available to view after the event for you to catch up on anything that you have missed, or in case you want to watch any rich presentations again to make sure you've taken in all the content. And just to introduce IGEM, in case you aren't aware, we are the professional engineering institution for the global gas sector, serving individual engineering and non-engineering members, providing a route to professional registration within the Engineering Council through EngTech, iEng and charterships, and serving hundreds of company members in the gas supply chain located here in these islands and around the world. We are passionate about engineering a sustainable gas future, so do consider joining us as individuals or as organisations. And through our many expert volunteers supported by the Secretariat, we produce and update technical standards, including for hydrogen and hydrogen blends, which is providing significant value by enabling all the hydrogen projects and demonstrators happening all around us, including supporting changes to regulatory barriers. And we also deliver training and events to equip the gas sector, all our gas sector colleagues from the upstream, midstream and downstream part to safely work with natural gas and biomethane and in preparing for hydrogen. We're also embedded as partners on projects at the coalface of net zero innovation, dare I say, in getting practical challenges heading for success at the pace and scale that's needed, and supporting policymakers and regulatory officials by answering a lot of the necessary engineering and technical questions that are presented to us. And you may also be interested to know that we host an online information hub and repository for all the latest learning, research and evidence developed in the hydrogen space from within our shores and from overseas as well. And this is called the Hydrogen Knowledge Centre, developed with support from BEIS, which everyone can gain access to, but with full access to the library for our members. It is an incredible resource with around 2,500 records from over 7,000 authors, and it's getting a lot of use every day. So we have a comprehensive gas system in place across the UK, which has a role to play today to keep homes warm, lights on, transport moving, and right here on today's call, industry powered. We all know that changes are needed for the gas system's role of tomorrow to meet those same needs, not least in the molecules transported through this system. Our colleagues in electricity have been innovating their way through the challenge of accommodating an increasing portion of clean electrons carried by their wires, and you can find out more about their activity in this afternoon's SWIC Week 2 session. Clearly, we also have a lot on our plates in doing likewise to prepare our gas system for a hydrogen future. And a great deal has been delivered over recent years to knock down the barriers on the question of if the gas networks can be repurposed for hydrogen, with now the question of how it will be done being answered in full swing. Industrial clusters are the hydrogen super places mentioned in the UK government's 10-point plan and subsequent strategies, and leadership in places like South Wales will have a cascading effect on the rest of society by providing ways through which to decarbonise. The staggering statistic that came from a recent report focusing on gas transport pathways identified through spatial analysis that the collective UK industrial clusters contained 42% of domestic heat within easy reach. And that shouldn't really be a surprise considering industry epicentres pair up with jobs and therefore homes, but that's half of all homes connected to the gas grid. It also transpires that almost 40% of HGV registrations are in these areas too. And then connecting up all these clusters gives the opportunity for a full gas system reach for hydrogen and possibly reach beyond today's network boundaries. So industry has quite the responsibility, and many others do, in supporting industry along the way, in leading the way on net zero and laying the pioneering pathway and pipelines for wider energy demand to benefit. And I look forward to hearing the latest goings on from our guest speakers today. Now, moving forward with this session, we have a great panel to take us through to 12 o'clock with Shell, RWE, National Grid and Wales and West Utilities updating us on their latest work to deliver a gas system of production, transmission and distribution to feed the plethora of industrial processes and power generation demand across South Wales, and build on that as a catalyst for wider sectoral demand from heating, buildings and transport. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Phil Hinton, Business Opportunity Manager at Shell, to take the stage. Many thanks.
Thanks, Oliver. Let me just check. The technical session here. That's not. Can people see my screen? Or just me still?
I can see.
Yes, we can, Phil. Yeah,
but not in presentation mode. That's all. That's it.
Right, so let me adjust this slightly here. Okay, good. Good morning, everyone. As Oliver mentioned, my name is Phil Hinton, and I'm from Shell. I'm the Business Opportunity Manager for this blue hydrogen opportunity that we're looking at in Milford Haven. First, I'm afraid I need to give you a quick cautionary note, which, excuse the small print, essentially says that the information presented today should not be considered as a guide for investment in Shell. There's nothing sinister about that. It's just a standard cautionary note. So moving on, before we get into the details of blue hydrogen, I'd just like to set the context for a moment as to why Shell is interested in developing this opportunity. And I'm sure many of you will know it's been declared at our annual general meetings and on our public portal. Shell's declared a target of becoming net zero by 2050, which is in line, of course, with the ambitious goals of the Paris Agreement. Importantly, I think to recognise that this includes not only the Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are the emissions from our own production operations, but more importantly, the Scope 3 emissions from the energy sold by Shell, both that energy produced by us, but also produced by others, but sold by Shell. And you can see here on this pie chart on the left here, these Scope 3 emissions, which is this sector and this sector, represent over 90% of the total emissions from all the energy we sell. So it's really important as part of our strategy and part of our target to help our customers with their emissions. And that's why Shell is looking to invest in low carbon fuels such as hydrogen. So that brings us on to the opportunity itself in Milford Haven. I'm not sure how much the audience, the broader audience, knows, but just in a nutshell, blue hydrogen is made from converting natural gas into hydrogen, and then the blue part is capturing the carbon that is emitted as part of that or produced as part of that process. So the key ingredients, if you like, for a blue hydrogen project are a supply of gas, a market for the hydrogen, and an export route for the long-term storage of the carbon that's captured. Again, some of you will be very familiar with the Milford Haven landscape, but for those that aren't, here you can see hopefully in this aerial photograph key players. And this here in the foreground is the Dragon LNG import terminal, which obviously imports LNG from global sources and is connected to the national grid main trunk line for export of gas or delivery of gas throughout the UK. Across the waterway here on the south side, we have on the far left here, just about make out the RWE gas-fired power station. And then further along here is the Valero refinery, which is also a consumer of gas. So between these facilities, we have the gas supply and the potential energy demand for hydrogen. As regards the hydrogen plant itself, there are many technology options available for blue hydrogen, including Shell's own proprietary design. I'm not going to go into the details of the different options. I'm definitely not the right person to talk about different hydrogen technology solutions, but suffice to say that within Shell we have many subject matter experts which would evaluate the most appropriate design for each opportunity. Of course, we're also working with our users or our customers potential customers of hydrogen to understand their requirements in more detail, particularly in respect of demand variations and delivery specifications, connections, and as well as the possibility of blending hydrogen into the national grid gas supply, which I think I'm sure Emily will talk about later. And all of these potential demands and offtakes do present challenges. It's not quite as straightforward as just a like-for-like substitution of gas for hydrogen. But all these challenges, we're working together with our design team and with our customers to work them into the final design of the concept. I mentioned earlier that in addition to gas supply and hydrogen demand, we also need an export route for the captured carbon. There's no local subsurface store for carbon, so we would export the carbon by ship. And in my next slide here, hopefully you can see, we're exploring the various options for this facility in terms of jetty location, vessel size, storage requirements, and again these will all influence the overall design. And you can see on this slide here some summaries of some of the key work that Shell's shipping group, STASCO, it's called, Shell Transport and Shipping Company, has and is doing in this area, from our early involvement in the first CO2 carrier. We're now deeply involved with the broader industry on the evolution and optimization of CO2 carriers, both in terms of size of the vessel, operating pressure of the vessels, basic design. And furthermore, we're working with the organizations to develop common standards to ensure both the safe operation of this process and these vessels, and also the compatibility. We think potential compatibility between projects will be important, especially in the longer term too. So that concludes my sort of whistle-stop tour overview of Shell's Blue Hydrogen project in Milford Haven. We have some Q&A at the end, so hopefully you'll have some questions that I'll do my best to get through during that session.
Many thanks.
I'll hand back now to Oliver.
Many thanks, Phil. And just to introduce you now to Jeremy Smith. He's the Hydrogen Regulatory and Subsidy Manager for UK and Ireland at RWE. Over to you, Jeremy.
Hi, thank you. Hopefully I'm sharing my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see the screen. It just needs to go into presentation. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, can you see it in full screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Hi, hi everyone. Jeremy Smith. I'm the Hydrogen Regulatory and Subsidy Manager for RWE Generation. I look after sort of regulatory and subsidy issues in the UK and Ireland, part of a team based in Germany. I'm going to talk to you today about our Pembroke Net Sero Centre, and kind of cover off some of the activities that we're doing there, the opportunities and the obstacles. And I was asked to take most of my focus on green hydrogen production, so I'll lean towards that angle. Just a little bit about RWE. This is an infographic that shows our operational assets in the UK and Wales. So what you can see is a whole load of little blobs. I think fair to say we've got a lot of energy infrastructure within the UK and Wales. What you'll see, there's a little yellow blob at the far end of Wales. That's our Pembroke Power Station, which is a 2.2 gigawatt state-of-the-art gas-fired power station. There's a few white dots in Wales, which are onshore wind projects, as is the red triangle. And then there's some hydro projects, and there's some offshore wind development in existence off the coast of North Wales. We also have a offshore wind project in development off the coast of North Wales, which will be the biggest single energy project delivered this decade in Wales, assuming it gets consent and gets built. And what it doesn't necessarily cover in this slide is our portfolio of other projects. We've got about 200 megawatts or so of onshore wind development projects and an interest in the Celtic Sea that I will come to. I think ourselves, like many other companies, we have a target to be net zero. Our target's to be net zero by 2040. The UK government also has a target to decarbonise the electricity system, so it's largely decarbonised by 2035, which obviously is of great interest to our Pembroke Power Station. Just a little bit about our green hydrogen business in the UK. This is a team, well, actually the worldwide team within Generation went from one person at the back end of 2020 to approximately 70 people now. And in the UK, we're growing from 4 people to 8 by the early part of this summer. We're working on approximately 30 green hydrogen projects across core markets, and our core markets are UK, Netherlands and Germany. Our focus within the team is on green hydrogen production and mainly aimed at industrial off-takers and mobility, and finding routes to market for grid constrained offshore wind locations for the hydrogen colleagues within our renewables business. We're potentially also a user of blue hydrogen. A power station like Pembroke needs to decarbonise, and blue hydrogen might be part of that picture. We have activity across what's called the value chain. So we're a renewable developer. We can supply power to electrolyzers. We can build and operate electrolyzers. We can supply and trade hydrogen to customers, industrial customers. We could trade certificates, etc. And potentially we could use green hydrogen as well within our power stations. I'm the lead in the UK and Ireland for regulatory and subsidy issues. And as you can imagine, with the UK's hydrogen strategy and various consultations that are out there on support mechanisms, I've been heavily involved with that, talking to BEIS. We also have colleagues looking at strategy, and then the main increase in our staff numbers is development people who are effectively originating and running projects to try and create hydrogen production facilities. So our Pembroke Green Hydrogen project is, if you like, our UK flagship project. It's the project that is most advanced, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Just quickly on Pembroke Net Sero Centre, this is, if you like, let's call it an initiative or a centre of excellence. We basically thought there's a need at Pembroke to pull together various activities within the RWE group. And Pembroke itself is, if you like, it's the sort of decarbonisation journey that the whole UK needs to go on in one location, really, and we can use it to demonstrate that. So the idea is that across all our various businesses, we collaborate and try and pull together projects based at Pembroke that deliver net zero. And what this really shows is that there's three strands to that, what we call three pillars. The first one is the decarbonisation of the existing gas-fired power station. And we're a partner within SWIC, and we're working with SWIC to help do some studies to feed into that, and I'll talk a bit more about that. We're also interested in offshore floating wind and the potential in the Celtic Sea. There's going to be Crown Estate leasing rounds, and we put a flag in the ground. We're interested in getting one of those projects and developing those projects. The final sort of pillar of the Pembroke Net Zero Centre is the renewably powered green hydrogen production on the site of the Pembroke Power Station. This is an infographic that kind of just shows some of the various flows and interrelationships down at Pembroke that we have, and really, I guess the key message is hydrogen's at the centre of that. So we've got the potential to create hydrogen from floating offshore wind or grid connected renewables. We've got the potential to put that into the gas grid, to supply industrial off-takers in South Wales. The Pembroke Power Station has potential for post-combustion carbon capture and storage, which then leads to carbon shipping, or potentially hydrogen through the power station can to create power, which then goes back into the grid. This slide really is kind of giving a feel for what we're actually doing in the three pillars and what the opportunities are, particularly for Wales. So, the power station decarbonisation, we've got as I said, a state-of-the-art 2.2 gigawatt power station that we need to decarbonise. So we're doing a number of studies with SWIC as part of SWIC to look at that. So kind of pre-feed studies. We're looking at a variety of hydrogen blends, conversion to hydrogen, but also post-combustion CCUS. And that will give us the information to start to think about, well, actually, how do we, physically change this power station to one that is decarbonised in the future. So what are the opportunities that arise from that? Well, potentially local blue hydrogen production, CO2 shipping, and memorandum of understanding with Shell is something that we're working on for various projects as well, not just this project, but other projects in the UK. On floating offshore wind, the opportunity there initially is the 4 gigawatt Crown Estate leasing round that's expected either late this year or early next. We're targeting a gigawatt scale development project there. That then leads to opportunities locally, particularly in the Port of Milford Haven, around improved port infrastructure, construction laydown, building of the floating foundations, a whole load of sort of engineering work for that in the long-term operations and maintenance basis, supply chain jobs, skills, apprenticeships nearby, and then the green hydrogen project. So this is there's a number of phases to this project, but effectively we're looking to deliver an initial phase of approximately 110 megawatts or so of green hydrogen production, and that would ideally be operational in 2025. The way we're looking to do this is that it'll be split between industrial offtake to industrial customers in South Wales, and that'll be approximately 100 megawatts or so in size, and then 10 megawatts or so of hydrogen produced for the mobility sector, looking to supply things like bus demonstrators, bus deployment, hydrogen coaches, hydrogen heavy trucks, etc. within the South Wales area, probably Pembroke and Swansea and that sort of southwest area really. The refuelers aren't likely to be on site, they're likely to be remote, and we would shuttle hydrogen to refuelers using tube trailers. That's kind of what we're doing. There's a second phase of that where we'll be looking to a 200 to 300 megawatt electrolyser as an extension project, and then the longer term opportunity is around gigawatt scale green hydrogen linked to the Celtic Sea floating offshore wind. But the issue that we have there is we start to exhaust the capability of the off-takers to take the green hydrogen. So really that depends on having a route to market via the gas grid, and particularly of interest is the Project Union hydrogen backbone that National Grid are talking about, which would be a hydrogen backbone that connects Milford Haven into a wider network around the UK, and I'm sure Emily will touch on that later. Just a little bit more about the programme for our green hydrogen project. So we're now at a stage where we've got feasibility reports done. The next stage will be look to get FEED study and underway, and that starts very soon this year. We'll complete those FEED studies, then we go into a consenting process, look to get planning. Ultimately, we're hoping to get planning in time to build the first phase of the project in 2025. There's an awful lot of caveats to this, obviously, and I'll go into some of those. We'll then, meanwhile, we'll start the FEED process for the second stage of the project, the phase 2. And that will carry on, but at a slightly delayed timeframe. And as I say, first stage operational 2025, potentially 2026. So there's a number of obstacles to all of this, and it's worth mentioning those because it might generate some questions. In terms of power station decarbonisation, I think one is around CO2 shipping, and particularly the policy development and creating a level playing field for CO2 shipping relative to pipelines. So Wales has the issue that it hasn't got any obvious CO2 stores. So shipping of CO2 is important. And I think from our perspective, it's important that that has a level playing field and is cost effective, encouraged by government, allowable, and it allows South Wales to decarbonise. In terms of floating offshore wind, one of the big issues is there's just simply a lack of grid capacity. We were offered a 400 megawatt connection recently in North Devon, for example. So, a project potentially in Welsh waters with a lot of Welsh benefits actually connecting into Devon. So there's an issue there, and that's particularly an issue if there are future auctions, future leasing rounds for beyond 4 gigawatts of capacity. How you connect that into the system is a big concern. One way that you could actually do that is to convert the power to hydrogen and then put the hydrogen into the gas network, either via a hydrogen backbone or a blend. So clearly that's something we'll consider when we look at our floating offshore wind projects. Then when it comes to the green hydrogen production project, well, at the moment there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty because we still haven't got the outcome of various government consultations on the low carbon hydrogen quality standard and various funding regimes that are going to be put in place. Hopefully that will be resolved over the next 2 or 3 months, and we'll get that uncertainty. That allows us to then design a project that fits with the requirements that BEIS have. Another uncertainty is around grid connection. From our perspective, we want to be able to connect that project as soon as it could possibly be built and not have to sit behind other, say, floating wind connections. And there's a benefit to that because we actually take power off the system, so we will actually create more space for other generation connections at a later date. And then the point that I've laboured a bit here, gigawatt scale electrolysis really is going to need a hydrogen backbone or hydrogen blending to allow that hydrogen to move to other places where there's a market. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jeremy. It's good to see from both yourself and Phil as well, the pedal pressing that's happening in bays on both green and blue hydrogen is happening in this cluster, and it's as well as the hydrogen backbone and Project Union, which also links to wider European hydrogen backbone system across all gas TSOs across Europe that are working on that together. There's the local transmission system as well that I'm sure Henry will probably want to touch on. So up next is Henry James, Net Zero Project Manager from Wales and West Utilities. Henry leads on industrial clusters for Wales and West, and very recently won the Telegraph STEM Award for innovation with his work on engineering for the decarbonisation of gas. Henry has some ground to cover, I understand, on their projects for SWIC around the delivery of hydrogen infrastructure, and is therefore afforded perhaps a little bit more time for this part of the session. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, so got a bit to cover today. I think we've got around 15 minutes. So hopefully we can cover everything in that. But good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Henry James, currently leading on Wales and West activity within the South Wales Industrial Cluster, and also amongst our growing involvement within HyNet in North Wales, as well as a number of other satellite projects we have across the network. Today I'm going to give you a brief overview of our involvement in SWIC and where we are to date in terms of progress, followed by a brief run through of some of the technical outputs which we've seen so far, and then finish off by outlining the next steps for SWIC over the next sort of 12 months or so. So for anyone who doesn't know who we are, so Wales and West Utilities are one of 5 gas networks operating in the UK. As the name suggests, we own and operate the gas network in Wales and the southwest of England. And in numbers, we supply 7.5 million customers with gas and invest around £2 million a week into keeping our network safe and reliable. So as seen on the slide, we supply around 59 terawatt hours of energy every year to 2.6 million supply points, which makes up around 11% of the UK total. We flexibly deploy 58 gigawatt hours of energy storage each day through our 35,000 kilometre network, which is the equivalent of around 6 million Tesla Powerwall batteries. We also have 19 renewable or green gas sites, which deploy 1.82 terawatt hours of energy each year, which is enough to power roughly 150,000 normal homes or 750,000 hybrid homes. We also have 47 power stations connected to our network, from the very small to the very big, which collectively are enough to power 3 million homes. And lastly, then we have 4 HGV and bus refuelling stations connected in Bristol, Swindon and Plymouth across the southwest, and these support around 100 buses in total across the southwest. So by now, you should have seen various sort of infographics of SWIC, as I'm sure you've sort of caught various updates over the last 12 months, and have a fair understanding of the technologies being explored in terms of green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, as Shell and RWE have covered today, but also in terms of CCUS and the opportunities around that. The diagram on this slide really shows the makeup of our activities in both SWIC projects, so that's cluster plan and deployment. So it's lesser known that there are 2 sort of strands to SWIC, and we've got work packages in both of those at the moment. So when projects kicked off around, when both projects kicked off around about a year ago, we had a core group of 7 deliverables across both projects, which looked to do the 2 things for Wales and West, essentially. So firstly, we wanted to lay the foundations for a conversion of our network to both blended and pure hydrogen. This is being done at the moment through our cluster plan work, which you can see on the left-hand side. And that's being driven by a project we have ongoing at the moment called Regional Decarbonisation Pathways. And that's where we're currently working with the Energy Systems Catapult and Costain to model our network across various sub-regions, and then apply that modelling to the physical network assets across our network and across various sub-regions. That modelling will then be applied to the physical network assets to see how they need to change between now and right out to 2050. Secondly, then, within deployment, so that's all the stuff on the right, we wanted to start addressing some of the key blockers around hydrogen in South Wales and begin to look at how hydrogen demand might develop within the cluster. Also, how you would potentially produce enough hydrogen to satisfy that demand and ideal locations for production. And then also complete an initial high-level assessment of how suited our existing infrastructure is to actually linking up industrial hydrogen demand and supply. So the existing programme of projects is due to complete by September of this year, and that's where we currently have a placeholder in for further work in deployment, which has been deemed D6.5 plus, very catchy, which will see us through to 2023, so through next year until the end of the deployment project in March 2024, and I'll cover a little bit about our sort of high-level thoughts on that later. So first off, I'll run through the basis of our regional decarbonisation work within the cluster plan, and I'll start here by saying a little more about the driver for the project, which has come about from a growing need to increase communication with local authorities, as well as councils across our network, specifically in relation to local energy planning. So historically, these stakeholders have looked at their geographical areas really as an islanded network and don't always consider the need for looking at the wider region and national UK energy picture. This is where we want to work with local energy planners to address this issue in particular, but also help to understand the future energy mix within their region whilst taking those national assets into account. This is where this project comes into effect, which is a combined modelling and infrastructure assessment, which will develop what we're calling a strategic and conceptual plan, and that covers 9 sub-regions across our network, where South Wales is principally one of the sub-regions and covers the sort of SWIC geography. So to do this, we're drawing on the Energy Systems Catapult models called ESME and ITAM. They're both whole system modelling tools, which are widely considered as best in class, and then working with Costain on the second part of the project to undertake the network engineering side and actually apply the findings of the modelling to our network. But in terms of progress, we were closely so a bit of a flow chart on the slide, and we were closely involved with delivering the established phase of the project, sort of from when the project kicked off in August last year until the end of last year, just before Christmas. Oh, apologies, I've got to reset the lights a second. Okay. Okay, that's not the first time that's happened, believe it or not. So we are, as I said, undertaking network engineering side with Costain. And we've been working through the first sort of phases of the project, which is moving through sort of literature review, stakeholder engagement, and then agreeing the assumptions and actually developing the scenarios. And for those scenarios, we have 3 scenarios as part of the modelling, and they are the balanced hydrogen and electrified scenario, so fairly typical of techno-economic modelling. And then sort of following on from that, at the end of last year, the focus has really been on the iteration phase, which is the bit you can see in the middle, where the sub-regional modelling or strategic plan has been completed and then findings applied to our gas network as part of the conceptual plan. So that's currently in progress. Both these plans will then flow into a final report, which is due towards the end of April and hopefully be published in sort of early May. So look out for that, and that will really help us to sort of have these well-targeted and justified discussions with local energy planners, and we're already starting to engage with those stakeholders now. So I put this slide in to give a flavour of some of the interim modelling outputs, which we began to see as modelling progressed. So noting, and it's an important point, that these are very much draft findings at the moment and may possibly change in the modelling iterations and reflected in the final reporting. So it's quite likely that these will change between this presentation and when the final report goes public. It's also worth remembering that this is a techno-economic model, so it doesn't take policy and the trajectory of changing net zero targets into account. So the map on the right-hand side shows the split of the 9 sub-regions across our network, but these findings are solely for Wales. So that's from the national ESME modelling tool, and then South Wales, the SWIC region, from the ITEM modelling. So the first output, and perhaps one of the more surprising outputs we've seen, is that there is some residual natural gas use in 2050. And that's largely driven by the steel and refinery sectors. So because all scenarios are net zero, this means that CCS or CCUS is capturing those emissions, and we're still reaching that net zero target in the scenarios. But with that being said, the majority of existing natural gas consumption is still switching to hydrogen by 2050, including a number of industrial users as well. Secondly, then the majority of hydrogen consumed in Wales is to decarbonise residential heat and industry. So smaller amounts are used later in sort of later on in sort of 2040 to 2050 to decarbonise transport, and particularly in Wales, that's with shipping, which highlights the potential opportunity of drawing on the numerous deep water ports we have across South Wales, such as those in Milford Haven, Port Talbot and Barry, and that obviously ties in then with what Jeremy was saying in terms of having Wales having a very much a lack of or very little CO2 storage potential, which again drives the need for shipping. Thirdly, then residential heat is entirely decarbonised by 2045 in Wales, and this is through the 3 key zero carbon technologies which the model has to deploy. So principally, you have hydrogen boilers. Secondly, then electricity, which is predominantly from heat pumps, and lastly, district heat, which is supplied mainly by large-scale heat pumps. So lastly, and perhaps most importantly, in terms of the opportunity for Wales, is that in all 3 scenarios, Wales produces enough hydrogen not only to meet Welsh demand, but also export that hydrogen to other regions of the UK. And conversely, the southwest region is actually a net importer of hydrogen, which highlights potential opportunities for hydrogen pipeline transportation across the Western Gateway, and yeah, a potential sort of export-import scenario with Wales in the southwest. So now moving away from our work in the cluster plan. So within deployment, we have an initial hydrogen infrastructure assessment, which we have worked to deliver alongside Costain. And this work was really a desktop study to model the South Wales LTS, or local transmission system, for cases of blended and pure hydrogen. So the first thing I'll do is just mention that the 3 scenarios we chose to apply to the gas network. And for this, we decided that a transition to hydrogen use in the network would involve quite a significant ramp up in the 10 years from 2040 to 2050, obviously when technology becomes more mature and things become more scalable. And that means we actually modelled our low, medium and high scenarios as low in 2030, medium in 2040 and high in 2050. So not necessarily a conventional way of looking at this sort of assessment, but given that the projected total regional energy demand doesn't look to really change across the 20 years between 2030 and 2050, we're quite comfortable that the low and medium scenarios could also be applied in the context of 2050, given the sort of the broad brush approach which this study is. So each scenario represents different proportions of end use demand being fed directly from the gas network. So the low scenario, as an example, views the gas network as it currently operates, where the primary source of demand is for domestic, commercial, and industrial heat, very well known, whilst the high scenario assumes that the existing things like existing gas-fired power generation will completely switch to hydrogen by 2050, which sort of reflects the demands of RWE, or the intentions of RWE and other partners in SWIC, and also things like hydrogen for transport will also ramp up. So jumping onto the slide, essentially what you're looking at here is one of the output maps from the study, which shows all of our high pressure PRIs in South Wales. And what we've done here is scale up the capacity to represent the increased volumes of hydrogen required for the medium or 2040 scenario. And what this shows, most importantly, as an output for us, is that just over 3/4 of our PRIs, I think it's around 77%, will not require significant upsizing or reinforcement for the introduction of a 20% hydrogen blend. And that's obviously great news, because we're currently anticipating that BEIS will make a policy decision on blending sometime next year to allow commercial scale blending from 2025 onwards. And that means we can start building on a strategy for blending over the next 24 months or so, and then undertake more detailed work to identify where we may need to make potential investments to allow blending to take place. So what we're trying to do with this is take a broad brush approach, but then actually bring that back into our business as usual activities. So it's worth saying here that some of you who are already familiar with PRIs will know this, but the sites which are shown to be out of capacity or orange are quite likely to be constrained by only one component, such as a filter or meter. So what we want to do with this work is really bring this thinking into our business as usual activities. When we go and undertake a piece of maintenance on the network, or whether that's regular or intervention, then we can go back to this work and actually use it as an opportunity, potentially upsize the capacity of these PRIs to get them ready for that sort of large scale blending. So lastly then, I'm going to talk a bit about the work we're doing with Progressive Energy, which really brings all the thinking within deployment together and help us move one step closer to having an initial conceptual hydrogen system design to satisfy potential demands in 2050. And speaking of that, it's you know, at the moment we're probably looking towards smaller sort of pure hydrogen LTS infrastructure, which is hopefully supported by hydrogen backbone, which is what Project Union is hoping to achieve. This is still work in progress and is due to complete in August, but is essentially building on the previous two deliverables, which we completed with Costain. And what we're doing there is what we're doing with this, sorry, is really by moving away from the transition or blended state of hydrogen to focus on a pure hydrogen gas network and start thinking about how we might actually link those large industrial hydrogen demands and production nodes together. This work started out through a demand assessment, very similar to that which was done as part of the Costain work, but focusing on the largest demand nodes across our South Wales network, which are principally our three offtakes at Dowlais, Gyrraedd and Dyfodol, and then scaling them up to reflect projected population growth through from 2030 to 2050. So the current estimation from this demand assessment is that hydrogen demand in 2050 would be around 5 terawatt hours a year, and then for domestic it would be around double that, at around 10 terawatt hours a year across the whole of South Wales. So at this scale of demand and based on established sort of prices and development of blue versus green hydrogen production, blue production was assumed as the sensible approach to enable such a demand at a sort of early enabling scale. And with that in mind, the two production locations that were chosen for the study are Milford Haven and Port Talbot, reflecting the ambitions of the likes of Shell for a number of reasons, but largely down to their existing proximity to the NTS for a natural gas feed. It's obviously important as a feedstock, but also co-location with large industrial demand, being the Pembroke Power Station and Margam Steelworks, and also access to deep water port infrastructure to enable a potential CO2 terminal. This is largely where the study has really got to so far. So this is a work in progress. And the philosophy of the transition is that the majority of an industry would have shifted to use a 20% hydrogen blend by 2030, which some may see as ambitious, but largely reflects the domestic ambition from BEIS and amongst the gas networks that we will reach commercial scale blending by 2025 or 2026. And it's then hoped that larger sites along the M4 corridor will switch to 100% hydrogen by 2040 through a dedicated hydrogen backbone, with all sites then switching to 100% hydrogen by 2050. So the next step in this work is to outline where the hydrogen backbone may lie. So that's a pure hydrogen LTS feeding customers at 100%, and then the domestic and commercial network at 20% initially. And clearly that has to link production with demand, but arguably the biggest challenge is being able to link this into some sort of storage facility. And although the NTS and LTS line pack gets us some way there, at the terawatt hour scale of storage we need, the thinking at the moment is that that's only really going to come from geological hydrogen storage in salt caverns. And some initial thinking that we've done around this is to potentially quantify the storage opportunities which lie within the Wales and West network. So as you can see from the image on the right, the two opportunities which are so far unexplored is the Somerset and Wessex basins in the southwest. But obviously further investigation work needs to be undertaken to to quantify exactly how much we could potentially store there, and that will hopefully form part of our phase 2 SWIC work, which will take us through to next year and really start to bring this together. So last slide now, and I'll just cover some of the next steps in the projects, conscious of time. So first and foremost, the next step for us at the moment is to deliver our regional decarbonisation pathways work and ensure that report is published and then disseminated across the necessary channels. So look out for that. And we actually have a number of projects within SWIC which will be using the core outputs of this work to move forward. We'll also be kicking off our 2 outstanding SWIC deliverables as part of our sort of core 7-piece set that we kicked off with last year, ensuring that all of our phase 1 work completed by the end of August, which allows us to move on to progressing this further. We'll also be supporting Net Zero Industry Wales through its formation. So you may have seen the announcement on Monday this week, and this will allow SWIC to make a much greater impact and have consistent representation amongst the other UK clusters, which we see as really important. We'll also put SWIC in a very strong position for track 2 cluster sequencing in the coming sort of 6 months. As well as this, and I can't labour this point enough, but we can already see the growing relationships within SWIC itself and amongst the project partners will hopefully lead to some really interesting projects over the next 12 to 24 months to help demonstrate the potential of hydrogen and get us one step closer to a low carbon and then net zero cluster. And finally, I'll segue on to future opportunities, and that's where we're currently developing a portfolio of projects for the second phase of SWIC. And then these will hopefully build on our current set of projects to deliver some of its site-specific feasibility and feed work. And the aim of all this is ultimately to get hydrogen into our network and start demonstrating that some of these technologies are viable, both economically, technically, and from a safety perspective. And that's where we're aiming to as part of our phase 2 work within SWIC. And that's me done before the lights go off again. So thanks for listening. And yeah, I'll take any questions at the end.
Many thanks, Henry, for that and going through the detail of what you've been able to generate so far from the projects for SWIC. Really useful. And the last presentation of this morning, before we have the panel Q&A session, comes from Emily Lee. I'm delighted to welcome Emily to give her presentation on behalf of National Grid. Thank you very much.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, nice and clear, thanks.
Great. So thank you everyone. I'm Emily Lee, the Senior Hydrogen Analyst within National Grid and also the Regional Lead from a hydrogen perspective for Wales and South West. So today I'm going to give you an overview of Project Union. So Project Union is our plan to deliver a UK hydrogen backbone, initially connecting the UK's industrial clusters, but then also providing that optionality to build out. And as you can see the hydrogen backbone entering into Wales. The backbone we foresee is essentially through the phased repurposing of existing NTS assets, representing around 25% of the NTS today. We noted that Project Union was referencing the UK hydrogen strategy and it's integral to delivering that strategy. We see the benefits of being able to connect hydrogen production with hydrogen demand across the UK, very much to deliver the decarbonisation of industry. And just to illustrate, this map on the right hand side is just an illustrative picture. We're working through the routing options, so I just need to put that caveat out there. So as you can see on this slide, why hydrogen, I guess. So across all future energy scenarios, you can see that there's hydrogen needed in 2030 and 2050. And in the UK hydrogen strategy, around 250 terawatt hours to 460 terawatt hours is needed by 2050, and that's delivering around 20 to 35% of final energy demand. So we kicked off Project Union last year, and in the strategy phase we very much wanted to look at the vision, the overarching strategy for Project Union. So we engaged with stakeholders across the whole supply chain, about 75 to 80 stakeholders, and this was on a one-to-one basis, really sharing our plans for Project Union and understanding the needs from our stakeholders. Just to highlight, this engagement is still ongoing, so please reach out if you want to speak to us directly about Project Union. This is key and vital for delivering the hydrogen backbone, and so it will be ongoing throughout the whole project. So overall, the support we've received for Project Union has been really great, and you can see some of the quotes across the different stakeholders that we've engaged with. So the main thing that we've heard from our engagement is Project Union is required to decarbonise industry. So 50% of the industrial emissions sit within the clusters, but also 50% sit outside the clusters. So being able to provide that backbone across the UK to decarbonise industry, and also provide that optionality to decarbonise other sectors. It supports the levelling up agenda across the UK, so upskilling the workforce, creating jobs and delivering that hydrogen economy. Project Union is required to connect large-scale hydrogen production, so we're seeing production dotted all over the UK, and being able to connect those and provide resilience to those production centres, but also connecting it with the demand as well, and also being able to connect to energy storage, so that bulk transportation of hydrogen to storage will be key, especially in a hydrogen future. And also Project Union, we were able to connect isolated production, driving down the cost for the consumer and driving competition. So now we're currently in our transition strategy phase. So this is all the activity that we're completing right now to deliver Project Union as a whole. So it's looking beyond sort of that technical design. We're looking at impact assessment. So what do our capabilities need to look like? What policies where we need to change? Things like data and what data we may need to change. Our customer and stakeholder strategies. Does our procurement strategy need to change? So a lot of work is ongoing currently at the moment, and we are working to submit a reopener submission for the first pre-feed of the first pipeline section. So giving you a timeline of where we are, so we're currently in our transition strategy, but the next sort of milestone is submitting a reopener submission for the first pre-feeds for the first pipeline sections. And as you can see, it's sort of a phased approach. It will take it pipeline by pipeline through pre-feed, feed and construction. Again, this map is illustrative, so we're working out that sequencing and how that might build out. And engagement is obviously key. So I've mentioned, please get in contact if you want to speak to us and find out more. I guess the key design principles moving forward to Project Union. So resilience is key. We have to maintain our resilience to the current methane network, as well as the resilience to the new hydrogen backbone that we're developing. Coordination is key. So coordinating with clusters, coordinating with producers and demand, and understanding the needs of the end users that are on the potential affected pipelines. So we want to future-proof the system, so taking a whole system approach to our design of the network. We want to the principle of minimal disruption, so obviously choosing sort of the best sort of the routes that will cause minimal disruption, and lowest cost to the consumer. So obviously reusing existing infrastructure that we currently have, understanding that if we can repurpose parts of the network will be key to keeping the cost down to the consumer. So that was it from me. Yeah, happy to take questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. If I could invite all of the presenters to switch their cameras on, and then and as well as that, Martin to join us with his checking of what questions have been put into the chat, so they can be posed to those who've been given us the presentations. That'd be great. Do you have any questions to offer us for the?
Yeah, so there's a few questions that have come in, Ollie, as the presentations have gone through. So I think the first few were for Phil, effectively around Shell, and is Shell looking at blue or other colours, or other colours being looked at, including turquoise, methane pyrolysis and cracking, which may help CO2 disposal and challenges. And that's from Carl Shepherd.
I can't give a categorical answer on this. I mean, specifically to the Milford Haven project, we're focusing on blue for the moment. I can't comment on whether we're looking at turquoise. To be honest, that would be a question for my technical team.
Thanks, Phil. And then there's another question then from Errol Finkelstein. If you could deploy a viable technology, on site in Milford Haven to convert your carbon output into an environmentally neutral or green manner into useful output energy, avoiding shipping it away, would that potentially be of interest?
I'm sure it would. Again, I'm sure our technology team are looking at various opportunities such as that. But I guess it's important to bear in mind that it needs to support the hydrogen production process. So it can't in any way. It would have to be at least as reliable as the hydrogen production process and the hydrogen offtake demand. So that would be a key consideration in any alternative carbon disposal projects.
Thank you for that, Phil. And then there's a question from Manish Patel, and I don't know whether this is Ollie, you may be able to give some view on this, or Jeremy from RWE, and it's regarding the effect on injecting hydrogen into the network, and what effect that has on the methane number, and is that likely to affect the power generation capability of some of the CHP plants that run on gas engines?
I can say a little something, I guess, and others can chip in when they like, if they've got something to say. But if I'm right, Henry, one of the projects you're looking at as part of SWIC is the flexible gas engines, and so there are, well, across GB there's over 200 of those sites with about 3 to 3.5 gigawatt capacity at the moment, and there's a look towards, in I think your project, on what the behaviour would be between hydrogen gas engines operating flexibly instead of natural gas engines, and they are available at the moment. I think Clark Energy, for example, are one company that sell hydrogen gas engines. They can operate on a blend up to 100% from nothing. So I guess for those sites where there's sensitivities to a blend, and there are investment cycles and lifetimes of assets that have got some time to go yet, then there's consideration of at what point the best time is to replace those assets for those that can take a hydrogen blend. But I'm not sure I fully understand the question. That seems more specific to the process and demand for energy on site.
Whether you've got any more to add to that, Jeremy, or
yeah, a little. I mean, we're watching the blending discussion with a great deal of interest, and you know, I think we have some concerns about blending into the transmission gas grid, from a, power stations use large amounts of gas point of view, and our ability to convert power stations to run on it. I mean, obviously we're doing studies with SWIC, and that's great, but I mean, what we would also need is a certain amount of time period to change, effectively the processes and the technology within a site, assuming it can be done, and then a consistency of standard or quality of the gas that's then supplied. So, kind of concerns are, around timing, around how you maintain security of electricity supply while you transition across the UK, and you know, around that consistency of gas quality that we end up with, and making sure that, you know, it's not variable and therefore a problem for us. So I mean, our concerns with blending tend to be mostly in the gas transmission system. I mean, I guess we generally have a view that you know, the best use of hydrogen is in industrial uses because your CO2 benefits are better. But you know, I can see 100% hydrogen pipelines as being quite useful for us as a potential injection into that system for our green hydrogen projects, if there's a sort of off-taker of last resort. So that's also useful.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think I can share we through the technical groups that are involved in the SWIC deployment piece. Then that is a point of discussion that has been held, and that sort of transition or trajectory of transition in terms of injection, and at what points would you make investments and change equipment has been discussed in those sessions as well. And then it's really probably for people to go back to the OEM suppliers and look at what the capabilities are and have the discussion about that, and then try to understand a little bit better what that means to you in terms of equipment, and understand the challenge. Yeah.
It's been good to see some of the testing that's happened on industrial sites in the HyNet area. So they've brought hydrogen in to test in Pilkington Glass to run the site on hydrogen, and at Unilever, and I'm sure there are more to come. So actually getting on with doing some degree of testing will be helpful beyond just the theory, I would have thought.
Thank you for that, team. Next question comes from a gentleman called Jeremy Smith. I think this one's probably for you, Emily. Could Project Union's Milford to Bacton arm be accelerated to fit with likely deployment of the offshore wind in the Celtic Sea? Is this being joined up in discussions with the Crown Estate and National Grid electricity transmission?
Yeah, so that's sequencing. Everyone wants to know who's going first, where it is. It's quite difficult because obviously we need to maintain our methane network and then how that builds out. And so I can't say yes or no to that. That's something that we're working through.
Thanks for that, Emily. And then the next question is from Dean Prosser. Will the pipeline from Milford to Port Talbot be utilised for hydrogen?
Again, pipeline, any sort of detailed pipeline specifics, we're working through that. But obviously all options are on the table in terms of, you know, can we use the existing NTS pipeline routes? Do we need to build new build? So there's all those different options we need to consider, and who's on the end of who the off-takers are and what their sort of ambitions are for hydrogen or blending and things like that. So that's obviously something we're working through and we want to develop with regions to understand their ambitions.
I'm not sure what pipeline that was referring to. It could be a range of things, actually. It could be transmission, gas transmission. It could be local transmission systems. So say RWE could be putting hydrogen into the local transmission system, if that was an earlier option to get it exported from site. But there's also I think it's an abandoned pipeline between Port Talbot and Milford Haven, or Port Talbot and Pembroke Dock. And there has been a question asked around whether that could be repurposed for carbon dioxide or for hydrogen, and I don't know whether there's actually been a bottoming out of that query yet.
Thank you for that, guys. And then I think there's one for Henry then from Carolina Cole. What is the status of the storage evaluation in salt caverns for H2 storage compared to H2 production forecast?
Yeah, so the work I referenced in the presentation was essentially being able to quantify that as the next phase of SWIC. So we actually haven't done that work yet. We're sort of it's been identified as a need as part of the current work in SWIC, but but we're looking to do sort of tackle that in the next 12 months or so. We're also, as a Net Zero team at the moment, also working quite closely with Edinburgh University on essentially creating a hydrogen storage database across the UK. So that's in collaboration with a number of partners, and that will hopefully be able to answer that question in the next sort of 12 months or so as well. So in short, yes, there's a number of pieces of work going on which can quantify that and put some numbers behind it, but we're not quite yet there with the detail. And would welcome further conversation as well from anyone that wishes to get involved.
Yeah, again, Henry, I think you share through those technical working groups with SWIC, then this is a discussion point that we've had, and SWIC is building a view in terms of what would be the potential hydrogen storage facilities maybe that would be deployed in Wales with the absence of available salt caverns in that area. So yeah.
Okay. Can I ask a quick question while you take a look at that new one that's come in, Martin?
Yeah.
It's a quick question to Henry about the project on the analysis of where you've come to a conclusion so far that Wales would be a net exporter and Southwest net importer of hydrogen. It's not quite Wales, but it would have an impact on hydrogen supplies for Wales. Was there a consideration of Hinkley Point C nuclear power station being used as an aggregator of surplus wind for green hydrogen production, or pink hydrogen production, I think probably calling it now, to be a supply into the Southwest and into Wales? Was that captured at all in the analysis?
Yeah, no, it certainly was. So one of the things which the modelling does behind regional decarbonisation pathways is essentially allocate certain technology and certain production to particular points that we identified around the network, and one of those was Hinkley Point C. And obviously matching up with the hydrogen demand in the area, one of the outputs was that Somerset as a sub-region had a significant amount of pink hydrogen production from obviously from nuclear sources, and that is being driven by Hinkley Point C. So yeah, that is factored into the exports of hydrogen from South Wales. And what we'll see as part of the work is that actually I think the hydrogen produced in as part of Hinkley Point C will still be a factor smaller than that produced in South Wales, because of the larger industry in South Wales, which the Southwest doesn't have. A lot of that hydrogen produced in Somerset will actually be consumed in the likes of Bristol, and then further out towards into England as well by domestic and commercial consumers, rather than those large industrial ones. So yeah, in short, that yes, it's been considered, and that will be reflected in the final reporting as well.
Great, thank you for answering that. And it's useful to see that BEIS are actually pushing nuclear hydrogen for going into the gas grid as a funded programme of work. So I look forward to seeing what they produce from that.
Okay, so I think the next question from Jonathan White, and this probably for Henry and Emily. Are there any technology challenges with hydrogen backbone to avoid any fugitive emissions? Significant and varied, I think, is it, Henry?
Yeah, no, they're significant and varied. I think one of the pieces of work which we're sort of a stakeholder on at the moment, which will address a lot of these challenges, is LTS Futures, which is being run by SGN at the moment. And that is looking to, I think, repurpose an existing gas pipeline for hydrogen and actually demonstrate that some of these fugitive emissions issues, whether they're going to be a bigger or smaller problem than anticipated. So I think, yeah, in terms of the work we're doing, it's more as a stakeholder piece on that. But hopefully, as we start to work towards demonstrator projects like LTS Futures and linking some of the industrial customers with early production, then we can also start to demonstrate that in the South Wales network as well.
Yeah, similarly, National Grid are leading our project is Future Grid, so building an offline test facility from decommissioned assets, testing 2%, 20% and 100% blend. So that will be explored as part of that sort of demonstration project.
It's probably worth bulking those projects together to explain that the RAF site in Spade Adam in the north of England is a huge site. DNV have a big facility there, and there are daily explosions there as they do all kinds of fun things. It's worth a visit. But what they have set up there is a microcosm of the whole UK gas system, from transmission, so repurposed transmission system connected to the local transmission system. That's the LTS Future Grid and LTS Futures projects that were mentioned, and then into an H21 distribution system through all the offtakes and pressure regulation equipment and gas governors, then through to gas services into homes that were built specifically to test for the safety of all this as well. So that's that part. Well, that's doing a whole heap of stuff, but it includes looking at potential for fugitive emissions, and then looking across to Buxton, where there's the H21 laboratory there. That's been testing the tightness of the existing gas system for hydrogen, and where pipework has been taken from the ground of different materials and put into the laboratory at HSE Buxton. Where it's been tight for methane, it's also tight for hydrogen as well. So all that work is showing currently there are no showstoppers, and it's a question of how we get on with it rather than if we'd be able to.
Thanks, Oliver. I think the next question then from Dean Prosser. Is there any new standards or regulations due to come out for industries to follow or abide by? That's probably a discussion with IGEM. Ollie, I know there's a huge amount of work going on in that respect. Yeah,
there's standards kind of owned by a range of different institutions depending on what part of the system they sit in. At the moment, I find it really difficult to see a long list of codes of letters and numbers that refer to different standards. I'm a visual person, so I'm hoping that soon as IGEM will be able to show you a beach to meter of the standards that we have and the standards that have been developed for hydrogen and those that are yet to be developed for hydrogen. But there's also the standards being developed in partnership between IGEM and EU Skills that's BEIS funded for the downstream domestic and commercial use of hydrogen. So there's a lot going on, and I hope it will become a bit easier to share and digest as we have perhaps a visual version of that.
Thanks, Ollie. Don't think we've got any further questions now in the chat.
Doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like we do. But I know there's a few people here who have a geology link. I need to go to night school to catch up on geology. That was what I largely did at university a while ago. But if we just think about the different sources of hydrogen and the different colours of hydrogen, quite often white or gold hydrogen, which is the naturally occurring hydrogen, there's too many colours. What matters is it's net zero compliant, but naturally occurring hydrogen is usually written off. But our engineering colleagues in the geology sector and the Geological Society of London, their magazine, they bring out their latest one, is giving us a direction to make sure that we don't rule out naturally occurring hydrogen, because all the exploration for energy so far has been in places where you would not come across naturally occurring hydrogen, and there are actually flowing gas wells of hydrogen that are not reducing in their flow rates, and are being described by these geology experts as renewable hydrogen, and so there should be some focus on making sure that we look into where those more likely occurrences are of natural hydrogen, to make sure that that's a resource that's considered alongside other options as well. I just thought it was worth pointing that out because it was a surprise to me recently when I read about that.
Thanks for that, Ollie.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, another question was there?
No, it was just a thank you from myself to yourself for the professional chairing of the panel, and thank you to the presenters. So Phil Hinton from Shell, Jeremy Smith from RWE, Emily Lee from National Grid and Henry James from Wales and West Utilities. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for all those who've attended. If there are any further questions or information that people require, please make contact through the SWIC organisation, and we should be able to put you in contact with relevant parties who may be able to help you with some of those challenges that we've discussed today, and work through those problems for industry and the wider sort of utility networks challenges. So, okay, I don't know whether you've got any sort of final comments, Ollie.
No, I was just going to say the same in regards of thanking the speakers, and thank you for the attendees for joining the session, and that I hope you all enjoy the remainder of your Wednesdays, and that you can be released for your lunch a little earlier than you expected, unless you've been sneaking it behind your screens already. So thank you very much for the presenters and for everyone who's come along.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.